Welcome to False Claims, Real Consequences.
This is False Claims, Real Consequences with Stephen Teller. Steve is a veteran employment and whistleblower attorney with over 2 decades of experience advising professionals through job transitions, retaliation claims, and severance negotiations. I'm Lisa Mosbey, and today we'll be discussing retaliation at work, how to recognize it, document it, and defend yourself. Steve, thank you so much for joining me with this one.
Happy to be here.
Can you share with me what is considered an illegal retaliation and how it's different from general unfair treatment?
Yeah, so employment in Washington is what's known as employment at will. And that means a company can hire or fire somebody for a good reason or a bad reason or no reason at all. And that applies equally to the terms and conditions of employment. So tomorrow, your boss could say, I'm cutting your pay in half, sorry. Not illegal, unless it's illegally motivated. We'll talk about that in a second. But they can do all kinds of stuff. So being mean to you by itself isn't illegal. You can have a boss who's a jerk, who's doing a bad job, and all the business reasons and management can support them. And that's not by itself illegal. It can be stupid. It can drive the business into the ground, right? Okay, I made that point. There are illegal things. We know that. Discrimination, retaliation and whistleblowing, and contracts are the primary exceptions to employment at will. Discrimination is protected class, who we are, identity. Retaliation is protected activity. The point here, then, coming back to your question, is not every behavior that results in a bad reaction is protected activity. It's not illegal to retaliate against me for interrupting you in front of the vice president. It's illegal to retaliate against me if it's discrimination that I'm complaining about, opposing, if it's, hey boss, stop touching my butt, right? That's protected activity, right? Or, hey boss, I don't think you should be discriminating against those people. That's protected activity. Participating in an investigation, opposing discrimination, taking a medical leave, asking for an accommodation. And then so those are all retaliation, as I name it. It's also retaliation and illegal. I call it whistleblowing, but it's a whole different category of behaviors that are also protected. Okay, so it's illegal to retaliate against you for, hey boss, we're not supposed to drive the hazardous materials truck through the national forest, right? If that's truly illegal, it's illegal to retaliate against you and fire you in Washington state for opposing that issue. So any kind of compliance issue in the workplace safety issues, right? If you're really right about the law, you can oppose a violation, and that's protected activity. So that's the whole list, right? We don't have, almost anywhere can you say, I'm being bullied. It's wrong what's happening to me. It's unfair. Therefore, it must be illegal. That's not the case.
It does make sense. And a couple things to come to mind for me. One is, it's leadership. Like, we're not teaching people to be leaders. We're putting them into roles and then they are flailing. They don't have the right tools. And it may feel like something's wrong. And then the second one is, how does timing play into proving retaliation legally?
Yeah, well, so the fundamental question usually in a retaliation case is, what caused the bad behavior? Was it really caused by the protected activity? So that's really what we're trying to do, is establish that causal relationship. And, as we see in our lives, when one thing happens right after the other, we kind of tend to assume there's a causal connection between the two. Mm-hmm. So the closer connection in time, the stronger the apparent retaliation. The law says in various places that, 6 months later, it's pretty hard to establish the thing is really retaliation for what happened back then, unless you've got some kind of through line. The manager expressed irritation 3 times in those 6 months and then cut me out of the meetings or gave me the demotion. Well, now we have, that's why it took so long. They didn't have the opportunity to retaliate until much later. So close timing is definitely something that helps prove illegal motive, retaliation.
And then what are some of the subtle signs of retaliation that employees often overlook?
God, that's a really good question. And I was thinking about that. Most of the time I'm kind of dependent on my clients to tell me what they are seeing. It's rare that I'll say, and did they do this? And the person says, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you that. Right. So usually, when we're living in our workplace, when things are wrong, you notice the change, right? After I asked for the accommodation, that's when my boss seemed to start getting more mad at me, right? That's when I was cut out of the meetings. The smaller changes, just the emotional response of the person we're claiming is retaliating is probably going to be, part of it. You'll notice it, but you may not really articulate it, unless it's extreme. So that subtle change in the boss's behavior is probably the best answer, where you're really limiting to like, what's really subtle, Steve? It's probably that. That's probably the number one.
I think where folks might get into trouble, the word that pops to mind for me is tolerance. We start to tolerate things and we don't realize that this may be protected. This is a behavior that's not acceptable. And then we start to document. So, what kinds of documentation is helpful in a potential retaliation case?
Well, it's always a tough question. When we go through life, I think we touch things all over the place, and we leave, kind of a wake, like a boat moving through a lake, right? And
Mhm.
there's just, I'm shedding skin cells if I'm going to be gross, right? Or, I leave my DNA when I drink from a glass or something, right? And when I use my credit card, I leave a note, right? I leave there's a point,
Record. Mhm.
electronic record somewhere. That's right. Or other behaviors. So we have, meeting calendar invitations. Here's a meeting electronic record that shows that my boss and I met on this day at this time. Okay, well, that's slightly helpful. If you're claiming that was the date of the retaliation, it's good you have a calendar entry that proves you actually met that day, right?
Mhm.
So it's very broad. It's hard to say. I think gathering things that tend to prove the real reason and the history of the facts.
So, Steve, what role does internal HR usually play, and how can it help or hurt someone's claim?
There's a couple of pieces to this answer, because it is protected activity to make a complaint to HR, right? If I say, hey, boss is touching my butt, or I think, she's not treating the black people well, or something like that. And any kind of communication like that to HR is protected activity. And so if there's retaliation following that, it's just an important element of what we have to work with. When you complain to HR, however, my experience has been almost uniformly HR is going to side with management. HR's job, and I'm pretty cynical about this, right? Nobody calls me to say, Steve, HR handled my problem. So people call me when HR messes up, right? So
Right.
I only see that. But what I see is their job seems to be to deny any discrimination or illegal activity, to cover it up, come up with some other reason, help the manager figure out how to say it differently, not find it and stop it. And that's very frustrating to me. So I think you have to anticipate when you go to HR that you will create an issue, and you probably will not get full support from HR about the illegal retaliation or whatever it is, unless it's really, strongly supported by documents and witnesses. And
That's
I like
interesting.
to say, if HR can deny discrimination or retaliation, they will. If they can't, then they have to take action, usually against the person who's alleged to be doing it.
We don't think about that as employees. We think that they're there to protect us and help us. But that's a really valid point that HR is working for management. They are working for the company. Uh,
They really are.
with that in mind, how common is it that mistakes will weaken a retaliation case or a discrimination case early on? And what behaviors are those? What weakens our case?
Well, I think this fundamental issue of what's legal and what's not is the key to answering that question, because lots of people don't know, and they'll go in and say, maybe she's jealous of me and that's why she's being so mean to me, when I didn't hear a racial slur that she told to my colleague, so I don't know why she's doing it, so I make up an answer. The answer is not illegal, And now HR is going to write down my reason why she's being mean to me is not the racism. It's the, jealousy about my, I don't know, new car, whatever. Right. So don't say those non-illegal motivations that are causing the employer to, the manager to do the bad things to you. Talk about illegal stuff.
It's kind of like hallucinations. Like our brain tries to justify and make sense of it, but it isn't necessarily accurate. That makes sense. So, Steve, what protections exist under federal law, and how do they apply differently to public versus private sector employees?
So there are, earlier in this episode, I talked about employment at will, and there is a fourth exception. I mentioned three that apply to private employment, but in government, there is a due process requirement, and there are some additional laws that apply to protect government employees, right? Everyone has First Amendment rights, right? Freedom of speech. The government cannot limit my rights to communicate except at extremes. And that is a little bit less true for federal employees, because if the thing they want to talk about at work is interfering with their work, they can be disciplined for the interference with the work. And so you have to take a little care there. So it's one of the important differences. There are additional rights as a federal or state government employee, because government basically has to have a rational reason for everything it does. And it has to give you an opportunity before it cuts off your income stream. Government generally has to give you an opportunity to be heard about why, right? So, hey, we're going to fire you because we think you cheated on the exam. Well, wait a minute. Let me tell you my side of that story. That's what you get in government before termination, although much more formally done, of course. In private employment, that's not required at all.
So, if somebody is still employed but feels targeted, what steps should they take immediately?
Well, I think calling a lawyer, checking in, what's legal, what's illegal. I mean, if you can get some consultation, first off, to be honest, AI is getting pretty good. I mean, I would, number one, if you can't afford a consultation with a lawyer, Google all of these questions, and don't believe every detail of what you get, but, educate yourself as much as you can, about what your rights are here, to try to see, is it illegal if I'm, I don't know, not allowed to use the bathroom until, another hour from now, right? I mean, I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. I'd have to go and find out, right? When do I get to take a break? I think those are the two answers I've got. Educate yourself about what you're going through as much as you can, and consult with counsel. You can make a bunch of calls to lawyers and, see if you can sort of get free advice. But I recommend, pay somebody for a consultation. It's usually worth it.
And do you feel that someone should contact a lawyer before going to HR?
Probably. If it's affordable. If it's a problem that could interfere with your income, then it's gonna be worth it to, pay a few $100s to try to get straight about what's going on here.
And here's where I want to wrap this episode up. What's your guidance to someone who feels powerless or afraid to push back legally?
It's really important to reframe. There's definitely times when we feel trapped in the job, and people will call me and they'll say, I'm getting ready to quit. And I'll say, okay, well, let's do this action. And they'll say, but they'll fire me. Okay, you were getting ready to quit. You're better off if they fire you, to be honest, in terms of your legal rights. So there's a reframe there of, I'm not trapped. I'm choosing to stay, right? It's not always true. We do get trapped. I don't want to say no one's a victim. But to be able to reframe it and get out of that pain, that's the number one, so you can be your best self.
Yeah, we want to go look for another job while we still have this one, rather than being out there and struggling. But that's not always possible, especially if you're under mental duress or your stress level is just so high that it's difficult to go interview for another position. So I can understand, reaching out to an attorney, how that can help guide you through that process of leaving that company.
Well, and I think a really, I don't want to say like trauma-informed attorney, but I mean, an empathetic person is going to also help with, like if I feel trapped in this job, how can I reframe it, or what can I do to help myself not suffer from this quite as badly? Can I go to my boss and say, hey, boss, you do this and it hurts me, and I'm not able to do my best job for you because of this kind of thing that keeps happening. How can we work better so that I can make you look good? I mean, a frank conversation like that before the end of employment could make a big change.
And allow you to stand up for yourself so that you're walking away as your best self, most confident as you're leaning into that next job. I want to thank you today. This was great conversation, great insights. So thank you for your time.
Sure.
If you've spoken up and suddenly find yourself isolated, demoted, or pushed out, it may not be a coincidence. Visit stellarlaw.com to learn what your options are and how to protect your job, your rights, and your peace of mind. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review. We'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.